During the Nixon administration, between the years 1969 and 1972, 12 astronauts walked on the surface of the moon and returned safely to Earth. This event was even commemorated on 2 United States coins, the Susan B. Anthony dollar, which was minted from 1979 to 1981, and then again in 1999, and the Eisenhower dollar, which was minted from 1971 to 1978. The reverse sides of both of these coins were based on the Apollo 11 insignia, and show an eagle landing on the moon with the Earth in the background.
Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The belief that men actually walked on the moon is shared by the vast majority of the world's population. There are no high-profile scientists, astronauts, or officials that have openly expressed any doubt as to the reality of this alleged accomplishment. The only exception to this is former United States President William Jefferson Clinton. In his autobiography, My Life, published in 2004, he states on page 156, "Just a month before, Apollo 11 astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had left their colleague Michael Collins aboard Spaceship Columbia and walked on the moon, beating by 5 months President Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon before the decade was out. The old carpenter asked me if I really believed it had happened. I said sure, I saw it on television. He disagreed. He said that he didn't believe it for a minute, that them television fellers could make things look real that weren't. Back then I thought he was a crank. During my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder if he wasn't ahead of his time." To simplify, what Clinton says is that a gentleman expressed doubt in the Apollo claims, and he wonders whether that gentleman was correct. Now, exactly what is a former 2-term United States president doing, wondering about the authenticity of the greatest technological achievement in the history of mankind? An event that had marked the legacy of his own boyhood hero, JFK.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Obviously, he has some reason to believe that the moon landings were not authentic. If a former U.S. president is wondering about the authenticity of the claim, does it not make sense that you should wonder too? One can imagine why a former president would not want to come right out and blow the whistle by unequivocally stating his true beliefs. But he did, probably for the sake of his legacy, want to have it recorded that he did subtly flag the issue for those paying attention, and he flagged it by using the old carpenter acquaintance to get his point across. Regardless of precisely how much time Mr. Clinton actually spends wondering about this, a closer examination of the claim reveals that to have performed such a feat in 1969 completely contradicts the evidence and otherwise offends common sense.
Does this not look quite right to you? Do you think it should look a little bit more like this?
You don't see stars in the daytime on Earth, not because they're not there, but because the atmosphere is aglow with scattered light from the sun. If you take away the atmosphere, the sun will still be there, but the sky goes dark. That's what the folks get when they go to the edge of the atmosphere, and they're calling that the edge of space. But when you get to the edge of the atmosphere is no longer between you and the rest of the universe, and the stars reveal themselves just as they would at night. Since the moon has no atmosphere, then a daytime picture, if you're there in the daytime of the moon, you see a full night sky of stars, even with the sun in the sky as well. But when you get to the edge of the atmosphere, the stars reveal themselves just as they would at night. If you're there in the daytime of the moon, you see a full night sky of stars, even with the sun in the sky as well. Even with the sun in the sky as well.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. We were never able to see stars.
The sky is deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon.
If you're there in the daytime of the moon, you see a full night sky of stars, even with the sun in the sky as well.
Whilst
from
in
Mark
space,
Cameron. This is from Mark Cameron.
Whilst in space, have you ever looked away from Earth into the black void?
Yeah. So
all
because
the
you can
time.
see, because you can see the stars.
Oh yeah.
You know, and pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon. The sky is deep black when viewed from the moon, as it is when viewed from cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon.
And we could not see stars.
It's not a black void. I mean, it's black, but there's all kinds of little polka dots.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
And when you're in space and you're looking into deep space and you're on the sun side of the orbit, the sunlight washes out all the starlight, so you can't see any stars, just like here on Earth.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
Yeah, you can, and there's more than stars. You can see planets. You can see moons.
You see the gas Magellan clouds of the
you
Milky Way
see
galaxy.
the Magellanic.
The sunlight washes out all the starlight, so you can't see any stars, just like here on Earth.
Pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
Then when you look out into deep space away from the sun, it's the darkest black you can imagine.
Just the inherent beauty of it, the velvet, bottomless bucket of the universe.
In like just hanging there in a vast sea of darkness, and the most frightening darkness that you could ever imagine.
Pretty much all the time you can see the stars. From Mark Cameron. This is from Mark Cameron.
Whilst in space, have you ever looked away from Earth into the black void?
And the most frightening darkness that you could ever imagine.
Pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
The sky, of course, was black, but it had sort of a velvet sheen to it.
The biggest visual surprise was just how black the sky was. You have a brilliant sun, brighter than any sun you normally would see, even here in New Mexico. You have these extraordinarily high mountains. We were in a valley deeper than the Grand Canyon. But then you have this black sky, a sky blacker than black, as the old Vidicon expression used to be.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
I've often tried to explain the difference between darkness, when you turn out the lights and it's dark in here, or blackness. Blackness is the endlessness of it all. It's hard to comprehend.
Pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
Well, that was another part of the play that they put on for us.
Houston, we have a problem.
I have a clip that sets it up, and I'll show you how the Apollo 13 is another piece of absolute proof that the whole thing's a lie. Hold on a second. This is from a documentary that NASA did.
The crew must reduce power consumption to just 12 amps, about the same as a household blender.
We had to power down the guidance system, turn it off. We had to power down the computer. Really all we had going for us was a radio to talk back to the Earth and a little fan to circulate the atmosphere.
Okay, now, if you remember the story, and I just saw it again, and Ron Howard really stuck to what happened.
Power is everything. What do you mean? We got to get them down to 12 amps.
12 amps? How many? You can't run a vacuum cleaner on 12 amps, John.
They spent 3 days, a full 3 days, going from the moon to the Earth, having turned off the power to where they only had enough juice to run a little fan. what they did was they moved the 3 guys into this tiny little LEM.
To stay alive, they have only one option. They'll have to evacuate into the lunar module, Aquarius.
We want you to start getting over in the LEM and getting some power on that.
The lunar module has its own battery power supply.
Now that's the story. It's not arguable. You just heard it. Keep in mind there's 3 guys in the LEM for 3 days going from the moon to the Earth. Now listen to this.
If the LEM didn't have climate control, and had air in it, would it be hot or cold without the climate control?
If you just took a lunar module, well, let's take the climate control and it fails. All right, what happens then? You've got air in setting there, it's 70 degrees.
Now, of course, when he says it fails, he's talking about the exact same situation that they had. They had no power, and they're starting out with the temperature 70 degrees, and let's see what happens.
If the lunar module is setting in the sun, which it always is, then slowly but surely that temperature inside is going to go up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you ain't going to make it because you're going to cook long before that.
What powered the air conditioning?
What powered the air? Batteries. You had a number of big batteries in the lunar module. They powered pumps. They powered the air conditioning. They powered the communication system.
Okay, now, notice that there's a difference between what he just said and what the documentary said.
But powering down had another unwelcome effect. With the heaters switched off, the temperatures began to drop.
We were losing more heat out into space than we're gathering from the sun. And therefore, gradually, the temperature kept dropping and dropping and dropping, and finally got down to about 34 degrees Fahrenheit in the lunar module, even colder in the command module.
Temperature inside is going to go up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
It got very cold and very damp.
In fact, they're polar opposites. According to the documentary, the guy's saying it got cold in there, and according to the movie, it was cold in there.
I'm a little worried about this cold affecting our battery efficiency.
Alan Beam is saying that it would be 250 degrees.
That temperature inside is going to go up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
With the heaters switched off, the temperatures began to drop. The
air conditioning temperature inside is going to go up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
With the heaters switched off, the temperatures began to drop.
Now, to add to this, I'm going to play a clip about the construction of the LEM. Hold on a second.
The skin on the crew cabin was very thin, and that was all done because of weight savings. Weight was a very critical item that always had to be considered in anything that you did.
If you really took your finger and poked hard at it, you could poke right through the outer skin of the spacecraft. It was about the thickness of 2 layers of aluminum foil. But it's the kind of thing that you were reasonably cautious that you didn't jab any pointed objects through.
Okay. Hold on, one more.
The skin, the aluminum alloy skin of the crew compartment was about 12 thousandths of an inch thick. That's equivalent to about 3 layers of Reynolds wrap that you would use in the kitchen.
They're trying to tell us that those guys spent 3 days in this little capsule with no climate control at all.
Let's kind of summarize this. This is a lot of information.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, the docudrama says the guys in Apollo 13 were coming back. They were real cold. It was 35 degrees.
Right.
The astronaut says, no, if you don't have the air conditioner working because of power or whatever, it's going to get 250 degrees in there. That's hot enough to bake cookies.
Right.
And then the other astronaut is saying, yeah, you could literally poke your finger through the side of the spacecraft?
Right. I played it twice because 2 different guys that designed it, that's from Grumman, the guys that were interviewed about the construction of the LEM.
The LEM.
And one guy was, what's his name? And you always see Krantz, the mission director, who I really don't like.
If you really took your finger and poked hard at it, you could poke right through the outer skin of the spacecraft.
He's one of those, I mean, he's telling everything he says is untrue, whether it's, you know, and he's one of those guys that's high and tight with his haircut, and, you know, not on my watch.
We never lost an American in space. We're sure as hell not going to lose one on my watch.
Problems are our business. And I thought, we're going to solve this problem, get back on track. No big deal.
Kind of crap, and he's lying about everything.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right. No big deal.
But anyway, it seems to me that deep space is the most hostile environment, aside from being in the middle of the sun, probably in the universe. And these guys spent 3 days cruising through this with no climate control. Picture you take 50 rolls of Reynolds wrap and you make a room out of it.
The skin of the lunar module is so thin that you could punch a hole right through it.
With 2 layers. That's really exactly what they're saying that happened. And you put yourself in that. And then as a thought experiment, try this with a physicist and watch him squirm. Because if he's a working physicist, he has to buy into this lie. Otherwise, he won't get his funding. That's another part of this. And ask a physicist, if you made a room out of tinfoil, had air in it at 70 degrees, and you put it in orbit, the same distance from the sun that the Earth is, which is what happened, and ask him what would happen to the temperature inside after 3 days. Just the temperature. Forget about radiation. And by the way, they didn't have them wear their spacesuits either. They could have done that at least to not insult our intelligences to the extent that they did.
I am sick and tired of the entire Western world knowing how my kidneys are functioning.
Right, they didn't even have their spacesuit on, did they?
No, they never.
So I mean, it's completely ridiculous. It's like somebody sitting in an oven while cookies are baking.
Mark, it's even worse than that. It's so far out there.
This is Honesty. It's good to see you again.
And they're trying to tell us to believe that. And
No
it pisses me off. No. It went from the moon landings are boring after the first 2.
Network stumped us. One of them said we made going to the moon about as exciting as taking a trip to Pittsburgh.
To now it's drama in outer space.
More dramatic now.
So our boy is going to be marooned in space.
And this focuses renewed attention on Apollo.
The unfolding drama in space instantly reignites press interest in the mission.
There was an explosion.
And the network TV coverage pulls no punches.
Their oxygen supply is in jeopardy, and their water supply is officially termed critical.
One of the networks gives the crew a 10% chance of survival.
Yes, if anything more goes wrong. The House and Senate passed resolutions calling on the American people to pray tonight for the astronauts.
In Rome, Pope Paul led 50,000 people in prayers for the safe return of the astronauts. In Jerusalem, prayers at the Wailing Wall.
And here's what gets to me. Picture the whole world goes to see Apollo 13, right? And amongst the whole world, there are thousands and thousands of physicists and astronomers and cosmologists and guys that are just scientists. Now, what I'm asking is how come the day after the world went to see Apollo 13, why wasn't there a revolution the next day about us being lied to? Because what I'm saying, and you know, I got to tell you, I thought of this. Nobody else has brought this up about Apollo 13. So I give myself a little credit, but it also scares the hell out of me that I have to think of this. Are you kidding me? They're in space for 3 days with tinfoil? Anyway, what I hope the people listening will do is not believe me, but do your own research. Go look into it. And you'll find everything I'm saying is true.
Oh.
And it's scary because what does that say, not only about us, the public, but what does it say about all the guys at NASA? Either they were all in on it, which I don't buy,
Right.
or they were all in an Orwellian doublethink denial delusion, which the rest of the world are living under.
His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know. To hold simultaneously two opinions, which cancelled out. To forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again.
Now, everybody says you can't have a conspiracy because too many people would know. Well, in general, they don't tell everybody. It's compartmentalized. You could theoretically get away with the whole Apollo hoax with 5 people knowing about it, aside from the astronauts, just by feeding in, you know, the video feed that who knows where it's coming from. It comes into NASA. They assume it's coming from the moon or wherever. And so why should they think different? But how come someone didn't say, why aren't they either freezing to death or cooking? And how could they survive the radiation?
In 1959, I was working with advanced research at Rocketdyne, and their own studies proved that radiation levels on the moon were lethal. This corroborated Russian research. The Russians claimed that for a man to survive on the moon with the radiation emitted from solar and cosmic sources, he would have to be shielded by 4 feet of solid lead.
20 seconds and counting. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared. Okay, we got a roll program.
Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.